Can I see that script one more time? We're really getting desperate now, aren't we?
Yep.
Sule! The Stormlight Archive has no shortage of mysterious characters. Some of them have been explored well, but a few of these ancient legends remain frustratingly in the shadows. Today, I want to do a deep dive on a character that I'm sure you will have heard of. There will be spoilers for the Stormlight Archive through Wind and Truth. Like, major spoilers. If you aren't caught up, seriously, go away. Also, please consider subscribing for weekly Cosmere content, and hype this video so more people will see it. With all that out of the way, let's talk about Nohadon the Wise. So, who is King Nohadon? Well, he was a king. Nohadon, or rather Bajardin, his name before being Vorinified, ruled over the Silver Kingdom Alethela during the Heraldic Epics. I know, that was a lot of not real words. The Silver Kingdoms comprised 10 different kingdoms across Roshar that fought against Odium from the first desolation all the way to the last. The Heraldic Epics is the name given to that time in Rosharan history. I'm gonna save that topic for another video, but just know that Alethela is roughly where Alethkar currently exists. It's commonly believed that each epic ended with a desolation, though this is technically still just a theory. We really don't have much factual information from this time, and it's hard to separate the myths from historical realities. We do know that Nohadon started his reign before the founding of the Knights Radiant. This is made apparent in our first meeting with him in the Way of Kings. Also, Hoid's world singer apprentice Sene Kald wrote a treatise on each order of the Knights Radiant, 31 years into the 6th epic. So Nohadon would have started his rule sometime prior to this. Speaking of the Way of Kings, we learn in the Way of Kings that Nohadon is the writer of the Way of Kings. It is a book of 40 parables that will go on to save the world, or enslave it, depending on your perspective, I guess. But Nohadon didn't write this book until later in life, for he did not have time to write in his youth. Now, we don't know exactly when he became a king, but we do know that Nohadon had to deal with a desolation during his reign. When Dalinar has his first vision of Nohadon in the Way of Kings chapter 60, we see the ruler burdened by the destruction of his kingdom. Not only was Alethela littered with corpses, but entire kingdoms had fallen, leading to a 90% casualty rate by the end of the desolation. We learned that the kingdoms had been in conflict even before the desolation began, driven by an unnamed Surgebinder named Alakovish. Speaking of which, it appears that Nohadon may have been a Surgebinder himself. I admit the text itself makes it quite unclear, but at the very least he was a leader for the Surgebinders, and here's what I mean. Nohadon states this: Alakovish was a Surgebinder. He should have known better, and yet the Nahel bond gave him no more wisdom than a regular man. Alas, not all Spren are as discerning as Honor Spren. Obviously, Nohadon has knowledge of the true Spren, and this quote suggests a special partiality to Honor Spren. It's quite possible that he was bonded to an Honor Spren, or at least led those who were. Dalinar appeared in this vision as a man named Karm, supposedly an advisor to Nohadon and a Surgebinder leader himself. After Dalinar agrees with Nohadon's musings, Nohadon says this: I worried that you would find my claims too forward, but your own Surgebinders were, but no, we should not look backward. To me, this suggests that there may have been inklings of structure forming among the Surgebinders before the Order of Knights Radiant were formed by Ishar. It would make sense that the factions of Honor Spren bonded one community and Peak Spren another. These naturally forming groups would eventually be united into orders based on Spren type. It seems that before then, there were leaders of Surgebinder factions, Alakovish, Karm, and Nohadon being 3 of those leaders. This is, of course, just my own speculation, and Brandon is guaranteed to shatter my expectations. Regardless, things get weird when Dalinar asks, what do you think should be done with these Surgebinders? And Nohadon responds, I don't know if we can force them to do anything. Their power, well, Alakovish proves the allure that Surgebinders have for the common people. If only there were a way to encourage them. They need to be better, old friend. We all do. The responsibility of what we've been given, whether it be the crown or the Nahel bond, needs to make us better. See, this reads as though Nohadon is excluding himself and Karm from the category of Surgebinders. Perhaps they were just kings who led Surgebinders. But it gets more complicated when Nohadon continues. I can read your disagreement in your face. It's alright, Karm. I realize that my thoughts on this subject are unconventional. Perhaps the rest of you are right. Perhaps our abilities are proof of a divine election. But if this is true, should we not be more wary of how we act? To me, this seems to clearly lump Nohadon and Karm into the category of Surgebinders. So I'm not really sure what to make of this, but I would personally bet that Nohadon was some kind of Surgebinder. Not only was he well respected, but Brandon himself confirmed that Nohadon was special among kings and Surgebinders. I do see a lot of people speculating that he was a bondsmith of some sort, which may be true. I could even see him having been bonded to one of the ancient Spren of Roshar. We don't know what this looks like, and maybe it looks different enough from the normal Nahel bond that Nohadon wouldn't consider himself a Surgebinder. Again, just speculation. What we do know is that Nohadon would go on to rebuild Alethela and reunite the kingdoms in preparation for the next desolation. Unfortunately, we don't know how long that took or what it looked like. We do know that at some point he travels to Shinovar, then known as the kingdom Shinkaknish, to quell an invasion. That is, if you trust that the story was really told by Nohadon. More on that in a minute. Sule, real quick, if you want to join our private theory crafting Discord, gain access to our fan shirts, or simply support us, join the Patreon in the link below. We also know that he likely wrote other books. He became known as a philosopher, with even Nail calling him a great moralist. Though whether or not he's the best judge of morality is absolutely up for discussion. Also, Shallan claims to have read the works of Nohadon when Jasnah questions her about her education in formal logic and its related fields. I think we can assume that philosophy counts as a related field, and Shallan makes it sound like everybody knows Nohadon's works, like baby's first philosopher. Obviously, Nohadon's kingdoms became stable enough for him to write books. In fact, he would write in the Way of Kings that his life after the desolation was quite comfortable. So comfortable that he would walk from some place called Abamabar to Urithiru to really know what it was like to be a common man. Jasnah questions the validity of this claim, but she lost a debate against the genius god of evil, so what does she know? In one of Dalinar's later visions, Nohadon confirms that he indeed made this journey, using the caverns beneath Urithiru instead of cheating with an Oathgate. And again, that's if you believe that it was actually Nohadon in these visions. I guess it's time to talk about that. The real mystery of Nohadon that you probably clicked on this video for. In chapter 109 of Oathbringer, Dalinar has another vision, but this one is different. Odium began invading the Stormfather's visions, so Dalinar and the Stormfather agreed to no more visions. However, in the midst of Dalinar's agony at the memories of his wife flooding back to him, he finds himself in a new vision. He's back in Alethela, though this time decades later. As he begins introspecting, here is what we see. Dalinar started toward the balcony, but storms. That light was so intense. It washed over him, making his eyes water, and he had to raise his hand to shield his eyes. He hears some scratching from another chamber, and he heads there, where he notices a shadow move and block the sun from a window. But that sun was coming from a different spot than the direction of that brilliant light from the balcony. The problem then comes when Dalinar looks below the door and that mysterious bright light is no longer there. After this, Nohadon seems to appear out of nowhere, confusing Dalinar. Nohadon is now a jovial old man putting together a shopping list. He tells Dalinar it's good to see him again. Even though the last time they met, Nohadon was a construct of the Stormfather, and Dalinar appeared like Karm to him. Regardless, the two go shopping. Nohadon jumps off of a balcony and slides down a cloth banner like he's an edge dancer. He even glows, suggesting that he is, in fact, a Surgebinder. I'm not going to go over the whole vision, but Nohadon and Dalinar talk philosophy, and the talk helps Dalinar decide to stop his drunkenness and return to action again. The interesting thing here is that Nohadon seems to be quite aware of realmatic theory, far more so than Dalinar. Dalinar even admits this vision is not like the other ones. Something really fishy's happening. So, was that really Nohadon? Before jumping to conclusions, let's talk about one more vision, the Wind and Truth vision. Dalinar has taken up the Shard of Honor at this point. He is a god. Before committing to a clash with Odium that would decimate Roshar, a strange light envelops him and begins one final vision. Dalinar constantly feels warm during this vision, almost like he's being soothed. At some point, he even comments about how he can't seem to bring himself to anger due to this warmth. Also, there is a strange light coming through the windows that is described as soft, and everything around him looks blurry. Look, if this doesn't scream spiritual realm shenanigans, I don't know what does. Here Here, Nohadon speaks to Dalinar again with memories of their past conversation. He had made shin bread for both of them to eat, something he promised to do in the last strange vision. They talk philosophy again, which again helps Dalinar decide what he needs to do. Throughout the conversation, Nohadon continues to prove that he is quite Cosmere aware, even of present events that a memory of himself shouldn't be. Dalinar makes a remark here that he doesn't feel like a god in this place. He feels like a man talking to another man. Nohadon thanks Dalinar for listening to him all these years, and the vision ends before Dalinar goes on to gambit his Sunmaker. So what's going on with Nohadon in those final two visions? Clearly they're not the same kinds of manifestations as the ones curated for Dalinar by the Stormfather. These were more surreal. Well, there's been no shortage of theorizing on this. One popular theory is that Nohadon has become a powerful invested entity. He's been hiding, watching events unfold from afar, and shows up to give Dalinar the push he needs in the right moments. This would make sense, as it helps explain who is giving Dalinar the visions, and how Nohadon became so aware of the Cosmere. Maybe he even became a shard. I've even theorized myself that Nohadon could be the vessel of valor on Roshar, inspiring bravery in key moments of the Stormlight Archive. But I've fallen out of love with this theory, and I'll explain what I think is actually happening in a minute. Another theory I've heard is that Nohadon is Adonalsium. The parables of the Way of Kings, especially the walk from Abamabar to Urithiru, could relate nicely to Adonalsium, a ruler who wanted to understand his people better by walking in their shoes. After being shattered, his cognitive shadow formed a body in the form of Nohadon and learned to become a man. Without spending too much time on this, I think there's too many problems with this theory. The strongest evidence against this is that Brandon has stated many times that the shards are what is left of Adonalsium. We don't know if Adonalsium has a cognitive shadow, and why would it become a powerful king during a desolation caused by himself to eventually decide in his old age to learn what it's like to be a common man? For every passage in the Way of Kings that seems to fit Adonalsium, there are two more that just don't. Another theory I've heard is that another invested entity used Nohadon as a puppet to guide Dalinar. Usually Cultivation is the one causing these visions in this theory, and she uses Nohadon because he is a man that Dalinar will listen to. She grants these visions in two critical moments for Dalinar. After all, she was pruning him for the decision this whole time. The only problem is that she would have ended up leading him to a decision that she didn't want at all. In fact, she was terrified and fled Roshar because of Dalinar's decision to give up the power. I can't imagine if Cultivation was manipulating Dalinar with those visions that she would have let him leave without making the decision that she wanted. The final theory is one that I personally buy, and I call it Bondsmith Voodoo. The first vision was created by the Stormfather, but the following two strange visions were created by Dalinar himself, completely unknowingly. Perhaps it was driven by fortune. Dalinar used Bondsmith Voodoo to manipulate the Stormfather's connection to Nohadon, possibly even his own connection via the Way of Kings. The Nohadon in this vision is simply a construct of investiture, animated by Tanavast's memories of Nohadon. We already know Tanavast knew him thanks to these quotes. After Dalinar is finished discussing Nohadon with Taravangian, the Stormfather says this: "He was a good man." The Stormfather said, "Nohadon?" Dalinar said. Yes. In Tanavast's diary, 4,500 years before the true desolation, he muses this: "It had been centuries since that man had died. Such a curious individual. Perhaps I should have insisted that he accept immortality, if only to study him longer." Obviously, Tanavast had some sort of relationship with Nohadon, and the Stormfather contains some memories too. Perhaps the same ones from Tanavast, or perhaps some unique ones from a bondsmith bond? But seriously, we know that bondsmith powers can do strange things with connection. In fact, something very similar happened at the end of Rhythm of War, when Dalinar used Bondsmith Voodoo to animate Tien using Kaladin's connection. Dalinar put Kaladin into a vision, similar to the strange ones that Dalinar was having. It was quite vivid to Kaladin. He was back on a battlefield from when he was in Amaram's army. Also, Tien was aware that he wasn't real. Kaladin asks him questions about that day, and Tien replies as though it had already happened. He's aware of current events. like Kaladin losing the wooden horse that the real Tien gave him. This Tien is a lot like the Vision version of Nohadon. Dalinar doesn't know anything about Tien or the day of Tien's death, but Kaladin does. And with Kaladin's connection to Tien, Dalinar was able to animate Tien to give Kaladin the motivation he needed to take the next step. And I think he did the same thing using Tanavast's connection to Nohadon. The final Nohadon vision is even easier to explain, as Dalinar now has Honor's memories of Nohadon, and he can use the same mechanics to animate Nohadon again. The real kicker for this theory, though, is that, well, Brandon himself seems to have this interpretation when he's asked about it. Brandon basically confirms that this is bondsmith voodoo. The specific mechanics are vague, hence the voodoo, but it doesn't seem like it's anything more than Dalinar unknowingly creating a vision to help him work out a complicated choice. And what better person to debate with than his own idol, his moral teacher? This isn't all, though. Brandon does give a little bit more insight on what's happening here. So I really think that's it. No secret shard, no remnant of Adonalsium. Nohadon was a king, philosopher, Surgebinder, and possibly more. But he died, as stated by both Tanavast and Reyes. I don't think it's likely we're gonna see Nohadon return from the grave, but I think we'll certainly see him again in future flashbacks. There are still more questions we need answered. What was up with the bright light in those visions? Why did Dalinar feel so warm in that last one? How did the visions trigger in the first place? For the first two questions, I think the answer will have something to do with spiritual realm voodoo. For why the visions triggered, I have no idea. My best guess is some sort of fortune mechanic. But what do you think? Do you have your own theory about Nohadon? What kind of Surgebinder do you think he was? Did you cry after I brought up the Tien moment? I totally didn't. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Before we go, I want to give a quick shout out to our true Lightcaller patrons, Mac, Aquila, Cobweb, and Stephanie. Thank you so much for all of the support. It truly means the world to us. Kolo?